The next very important part of getting that nice out of focus blurred background, the bokeh, is to understand the various factors affecting depth of field, or the DOF what we call. Now, a general misconception, as I have said in the past, is people believe that DOF is dependent on aperture of the lens, but that is incorrect. Now, there are three major factors affecting your depth of field. The very first one is the focal length of the lens what you are using. Now, depending on the focal length, whether you are using a 16 millimeter, a 16 mm wide angle lens, or a 50 mm standard lens, or a tele lens 100 mm or 400 mm, 800 mm, whatever it is. So, depending on what kind of focal length you are using, that is the first factor which affects depth of field. Of course, shorter the focal length. So, at 16 mm or the wide angle lens what we call, shorter the focal length, larger is your depth of field. And then beyond that, the larger the focal length. So, when you go 100 mm, 200, 300, so larger the focal length, shallow is your depth of field. So, of course, we will dwell deeper into each of these factors with demonstration with my friend the tiger over here. So, that is the first factor. So, depth of field is dependent on the first factor, which is your focal length. Now, the second very important factor is the camera to subject distance. So, I am currently at whatever around probably 10 to 15 feet from the tiger. So, the camera to subject distance is the next very important factor when it comes to calculating the depth of field. Of course, if you want to know what is camera to subject distance, on your camera body, if you see, there is a pi symbol. So, wherever the pi symbol is on your camera body, that is the sensor location within your camera. So, when we calculate the camera to subject distance, we calculate from that point till the subject, wherever the autofocusing point is looking at. So, that is the camera to subject distance. So, that is the second factor responsible for your depth of field. Of course, closer the subject is towards you, shallower is the depth of field. Further away the subject is from you, the longer or the larger the depth of field is. So, that is the second parameter. The third parameter which we all know, which is responsible for the depth of field, is the aperture. Now, of course, when it comes to aperture, smaller the f number. So, f1, f2, f2.8, f4. So, smaller the f number, smaller the depth of field, or shallow the depth of field. Larger the f number, f16, f22. So, larger the f number, larger your depth of field is. So, that is something which you have to remember. So, the three parameters, just to recollect, first is the focal length of the lens, second is the camera to subject distance, the third one is the aperture of the lens. Now, these three are responsible for depth of field. Now, for the experiment or the entire concept or the entire focus on this particular course is basically to get that nice bokeh, the shallow depth of field with a blurred background. So, as a part of that, the fourth parameter which is affecting the concept of what we are trying to achieve is even the distance between the subject and the background. Of course, this has got nothing to do with the depth of field, but the end result of this particular course what we are trying to achieve, for that to happen, the background where the subject, the subject and then the background, the distance between that, that is the other very important factor. Closer the background is to the subject, then that will be little bit probably visible. Further away the background is, then chances are you get a nice blurred out of focus background. Of course, that again is dependent on these three factors of depth of field. Now, the next other important parameter is obviously like calculating all these things. So, what I have done, so let me just show you. So, on my cell phone, I have installed the DOF calculator. Now, this is something which I would encourage you to do, where you can install the DOF calculator on your camera, on your cell phone, and then enter all these parameters and it will give you the depth of field. Of course, we will go in depth in understanding how to exactly use this application and what exactly it means. We will be doing that in detail. So, as you can see, depth of field is dependent on all these parameters, and what we will do next is go in depth into each of these parameters, and then I am going to help you understand the actual impact. So, we will go each of these different focal length, then camera to subject distance, different aperture. So, every single one of them hands on we will be able to like experiment, which is going to like help you get a much stronger understanding of these concepts. So, let us do that next.